guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing my August wrap-up. So I successfully was able to complete all of my NEWTs. I'm going to go through these books and I don't really remember exactly which challenge, which prompt I had for each of them, so I'm not going to mention that because I have a class in like 20 minutes and so I need to film this quickly, so I don't want to have to take all that time to do all that research. So we're just going to talk about what I read, what order I read them in, and just know that I read everything I needed to for the NEWTs, and I have successfully completed my potioneer training. So really exciting, but anyway, let's just get right into this. So the first book I read and completed this month was Frome by Edith Wharton, which I ended up giving 3 out of 5 stars. Unfortunately, I didn't love this as much as The Age of Innocence. This is a short story it starts off with a frame narrative following this man who goes to this small town in New England and develops this fascination with this older man in the town who seems really kind of hermity. He doesn't really involve himself much in the town, but everybody seems to really like him and pity him in a lot of ways. And so this man starts to discover his story, and then it goes into the story of this man, and it's really well written, which is why I couldn't give it less than 3 stars. It's very well written. For a book that's only 77 pages, the pacing is very, very well done. I found that the characters were very well developed. I felt like they were real people, and it was very impressive. However, I just myself wasn't overly engaged in this story. I felt that, first of all, there's a huge focus on cheating in this, which just in and of itself is not my favorite thing to read about, so that kind of hindered my enjoyment. I felt like I enjoyed reading it, it was interesting, but when I closed the book, I just didn't care anymore. It has a pretty tragic ending, but I just really found myself not caring once I closed the book. It was just like, okay, move on to the next story. Wasn't overly attached, so that's really why I couldn't give it more than 3 stars. But again, because it was honestly very well written, I can see why people enjoy it, why it's considered a classic, and it was very well, for how short it is, it was very well developed. I couldn't give it less than 3 stars, but it just didn't quite do it for me personally. Next, I picked up something that I absolutely loved, which was really nice after reading something I didn't love quite as much, and that is The Wars of the Roses Stormbird by Conn Iggulden. I ended up giving this 4.755 out of 5 stars. This follows essentially the beginnings of the Wars of the Roses, so we follow Margaret of Anjou as she marries Henry VI. We follow some of the common people who end up rebelling against decisions made by the king and his advisors, as well as getting to know Richard, Duke of York, who is this is kind of making him seem to be the bad guy of the story. He's working against Henry VI in a lot of ways. However, I feel like it's a lot more complex than that, which is one thing about this that I didn't love quite as much. I just felt like it was very much taking sides, and I feel like with the Wars of the Roses, at least for me, it's easy to see both sides, and I wish there was a little more nuance to it, and maybe that nuance will develop more as the series goes on, which I intend to continue with it for sure. But it was still really interesting. I have never really known very much about Margaret of Anjou, really about the beginnings of the Wars of the Roses. I haven't ever known a ton about it, and I really enjoyed Margaret's character a lot. I found that she starts off being very naive and childlike, which makes sense with her lack of experience. However, she ends up developing in great ways, and I absolutely loved following her. I also liked that it looked not only at the main players in the Wars of the Roses, but it also went down lower to the people and their experiences with different situations and how they played a role in getting the Wars of the Roses going. Really, really enjoyed that. I found the writing to be very good, especially after reading Agincourt by Bernard Cornwell earlier this year. I felt like that had a similar vibe to this, but the writing in that wasn't my favorite. I'm not assuming all Bernard Cornwell's books are written like that. I have yet to read any more of them, and I want to read more of his, but I did like the writing in here a lot better. I felt like it was a lot smoother, didn't pull me out of the story quite as much as that did. But yeah, I really, really liked this, and I think this is a really good starting point for those who are interested in the Wars of the Roses who really know very, very little. This is a trilogy, and I haven't read the other 2, so I don't really know if it's actually a good place to start, but I feel like so far it's done a pretty good job of introducing all the primary characters, at least for the beginning of the war. So Anyway, that's that. Then I finally finished this massive book, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. Knew I would, hoped I would, and it just was amazing. I absolutely loved this. If you don't know, this follows a man named Edmond Dantes who is thrown in jail being completely innocent, and he ends up, when he gets out, seeking revenge on the people who put him there, and it's just a great adventure story. I loved it so much. Edmond Dantes is such a wonderful character. It was very interesting to compare him actually to Jean Valjean in Les Mis, just because they are very, very similar in their backstory at least, and just the way they handle it is very different, and how that affects both of them was interesting to compare. I also just loved the story a lot. I listened to it on audiobook, and mostly in my car, and I had so many moments of just freaking out, screaming, crying, laughing out loud, because it was not just because it was funny, but because it was so dramatic to the point where it was just amazing. Like, I just was laughing, and like the narrator just made it even more dramatic. His voice would rise in volume as he was saying these passionate lines by the characters, and it just made it so great. Such a great experience. I definitely will be reading more by Dumas in the future. This was just amazing. Highly recommend it. I know a lot of people say that, but I loved this so much. Like, seriously, I cannot even count the times I laughed out loud just from the sheer drama of this story, and it was just so good. So many things, so good. Pirates and poisoning and secret romances and wills and like all this stuff, and it was just such a great revenge story. Very much recommend. Then I also finished the other humongous book I was reading, which so glad I did, and that is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, which I ended up giving 3 out of 5 stars. That may sound sad that this humongous book that took me so much time to read only got 3 out of 5 stars, but first of all, I was reading it for a scholarship that I really want to apply for, so I kind of had to finish it if I wanted to apply for that scholarship, and I didn't hate it enough that I like desperately wanted to DNF. There were a few times that I was like, if I was just reading this on my own, I might DNF this, or at least stop reading it now and maybe listen to an audiobook of it later, because I just was really struggling at some points. But I still am glad I read the whole thing. It just inspired a lot of thinking on my part. This follows a world in the near future where there's this woman, Dagny Taggart, and this man, Hank Reardon, who are kind of the last ones left of this society who are actually capable of doing a good job in their jobs. They both lead companies, big companies, and it's written by a woman who experienced firsthand the Bolshevik Revolution, the development of communism in Russia, and then later moved to America and experienced capitalism there and saw the difference. And so this is very pro-capitalism, so if that is not your jam, maybe don't pick this up, or if you're just interested in what she has to say, maybe do pick it up. But I just really appreciated a lot of what she had to say. I liked a lot of the philosophies. There were a couple characters, one in particular, Ragnar Danisgold, I don't even think I said that right, but he was a philosophical pirate, and he was the best thing about this book. He wasn't even in it very much, but I loved him so much. And there was also a girl named Cheryl who I found really fascinating. And again, a lot of the philosophies I really appreciated and agreed with, and even the ones I didn't made me think a little bit deeper about my own opinions, which I really liked. Some negatives about this, it honestly was just longer than it needed to be. I felt like a lot of the philosophy aspects were just beating a dead horse. It was saying the same thing over and over again. All through the book, it's saying basically the same things over and over again in different ways. And then at the end, there's actually this big radio broadcast that one of the characters does, and it really reads through the whole thing, which in the book takes 3 hours, so you can imagine how many pages that is. In this, it was literally like 50 pages of this radio broadcast, and he was basically beating a dead horse, saying the same things that the whole book had been saying, and it just was over the top. Like, I just was like, I get it. I don't need to read it anymore, and this book didn't need to be this long. Sorry, looking at the time. And also, I felt like there were philosophies that she was pointing out that involved business and economy and everything that she was applying to like intimate relationships, and I just didn't feel like it worked. I feel like intimate relationships and business are just different things and you can't treat them the same, but I felt like she was trying to in a way and it just didn't work in my head, so I didn't really like that. Also, there were several sex scenes that honestly made me uncomfortable, that were just very like honestly very abusive feeling on the man's part, like the man to the woman, almost violent and kind of possessive, and I feel like she wasn't wanting it to sound like that. I felt like she wanted it to feel like a balance of equals, but it really didn't, in my opinion. Granted, this was written in like the 50s or 60s, I think, so that probably played a role in how the sexual relationships were interpreted. But anyway, didn't love that. So again, lots of things I really loved about this book. In fact, yeah, Ragnar Danaskjöld, probably a favorite character of the year to read about. I loved him so much. But there were also things that really bothered me. So anyway, definitely recommend if you're interested. Just know that there is a sense of beating a dead horse with some of the philosophy in this. And there is a lot of philosophy discussion. So if you don't like that, probably don't pick this up. Then I picked up a surprise book this month, and that was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which I also gave 5 out of 5 stars. Really loved it. I have a full reading vlog for this, which I will link down below, so I'm not going to go too deep into my thoughts, but suffice it to say, I really enjoyed it. I thought Victor Frankenstein was a very interesting character, and his relationship with the monster was very interesting. It definitely was not what I was expecting, no matter how many times people say that it's not what you expect. I didn't know what to expect, so I just went on expecting what I did and was very wrong. So highly recommend this if you haven't read this, especially if you're just getting into classics. I think this is a really easy one to get into, easy to understand, and yeah, so good. Next, I picked up Dragonwatch, Master of the Phantom Isle by Brandon Mull. This is the 3rd book in the Dragonwatch series, which is a spin-off series of the Fablehaven series, so I'm not going to go too deep into a synopsis, but suffice it to say, I ended up giving this 3.754 out of 5 stars, and that's mostly because there were a lot of things mostly about the writing that bothered me, and I mentioned this when I read the second one earlier this year, but Brandon Mull just has these weird dialogue things where the characters will meet a new person and everybody has to introduce themselves the same way every time, and they'll just tell these new people their whole life story basically, and you're just like, why are you telling them all this? First of all, they probably don't really need to know. Second of all, you just met them. How do you know you can trust them, especially in this world you guys are living in? So anyway, I just really didn't like that aspect, but I love this world. It's so fun. It's kind of a magical world within our world situation, which I just love. There's these sanctuaries, I guess I can tell you this. There are these sanctuaries where magical creatures are being held to protect humanity as well as to protect the creatures themselves. Kendra and Seth, the main characters, end up discovering that their grandparents are the caretakers of one of these sanctuaries, which is called Fablehaven, which is the first series, and then this one is a spin-off series of that based on the ending of what happened with them. So anyway, it's just such a fun world that I absolutely love, but yeah, just the writing kind of drives me crazy sometimes, although of the 3 that have come out of this series that I've read, this one's definitely my favorite of them. I really, really enjoyed it. Again, it was just that writing stuff that really nicked it for me, but still plan to continue because I love being here. It's very nostalgic for me, of course, but also it's just really, really fun and good. So anyway, very good, and recommend this series, especially if you've read Fablehaven and you've been wondering about this one. Definitely give it a try because it's a lot of fun. And last, I'd have just a few more minutes, so we're gonna make this quick. I read The Rival Queens by Nancy Goldstone, which is about Catherine de Medici and her daughter Marguerite de Valois and their experiences with and against each other primarily. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. Really enjoyed this. Definitely have discovered that Marguerite de Valois is one of my new favorite historical figures. She just has so much character to her, and she recorded a lot of her experiences, which is amazing because that's not overly common. There were a lot of quotes direct from her throughout this book of her feelings about certain things that happened in her life and betrayals she struggled with. My biggest struggle with this was that it says that it's about Catherine de Medici and her daughter Marguerite de Valois, and I went into this mostly for Catherine de Medici, but it was mostly about Marguerite. Like, it honestly probably should have just been called a book about Marguerite. I mean, it added something because in the beginning it starts off talking about Catherine and her marriage and everything. However, once it hits Marguerite being born, it's all just Marguerite. It mostly focuses on her battles with her brothers more than with her mother, and her mother honestly was kind of a background player anyway, which is probably in part why she didn't seem very much at the forefront, but it definitely felt more of a story of Marguerite, and even in the epilogue it kind of discusses how both of these figures are viewed nowadays as time has gone on. And it mentions how Catherine's perceived and talks a little bit about it, but then it spends way more time talking about how Marguerite is perceived and why she's perceived that way. And that in and of itself just showed what the book was like. So I just kind of felt like, why didn't you just write a biography of Marguerite? Because clearly you love her. And Catherine was just like, oh yeah, and Catherine had a huge influence on Marguerite's life, but like, you could have said that without making it sound like you were going to talk about Catherine de Medici. I can't be too mad though, because the only reason I found this book was because I was interested in Catherine, but I just still, again, it felt like clickbaity a little bit because of that. I felt like the author did a really good job of when she shared her own opinions, she would talk about other people's opinions, mention that it's her opinion, which I always appreciate because I want to know what the author thinks about certain historical mysteries, but I also want them to make clear that it's not fact, and I felt like she did a pretty good job with that, so I appreciated that as well. And definitely recommend if you're interested primarily in Marguerite de Valois, but even if you're kind of interested in Catherine too, this at least gives you a pretty good idea about her life, but it just really doesn't focus on her. Don't expect going into this that you'll learn a ton about Catherine de Medici, because you really don't overall. So anyway, that was great. Glad I read it. And that is it. I really need to go to my class, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!